The rain fell mercilessly on the cemetery as Dexter Blackwood stood before his father's freshly covered grave. At 32, he hadn't expected to be burying the man who had built Blackwood Technologies from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. "Mr. Blackwood," a voice called from behind him. "We need to discuss the remaining assets." Dexter didn't turn to face his father's attorney. "There are no remaining assets, Mr. Finch. We both know that." 3 weeks ago, Westbrook Corporation had completed its hostile takeover of Blackwood Technologies, stripping it of patents, clients, and dignity. His father, unable to bear the humiliation, had suffered a fatal heart attack 2 days later. "Actually, there's the matter of your mother's care facility," Finch said, opening his umbrella to shield them both. "The payments are secured for another month, but after that—" Dexter clenched his jaw. Eleanor Blackwood, once vibrant and full of life, now resided in an exclusive treatment center, lost in the fog of depression that had consumed her after watching her husband's dreams crumble. "I'll handle it," Dexter said, knowing full well he had nothing left to handle it with. As the attorney left, Dexter noticed a sleek black Bentley parked at the cemetery entrance. The rear window rolled down, revealing a face he recognized from countless business magazines and newspaper articles: Theodore Westbrook, CEO of Westbrook Corporation. Beside him sat his daughter, Scarlett, her red hair unmistakable even from this distance. Rage surged through Dexter's veins. The Westbrooks had the audacity to come to his father's funeral? He marched toward the car, mud splattering his last good suit. Before he could reach them, the window rolled up and the Bentley pulled away, leaving Dexter alone in the rain, fists clenched at his sides. "I will destroy you," he whispered, his words carried away by the wind. "Every last thing you love." 5 years later, a different man stared back at Dexter from the mirror of his modest apartment in Cambridge. The angular jaw was now softer, the once prominent nose subtly reshaped. His naturally dark hair was now a sandy brown, and colored contacts had turned his piercing black eyes to a gentle hazel. Even his posture was different, less commanding, more approachable. Reed Walsh, bartender and business administration graduate, looked nothing like Dexter Blackwood, former heir to a tech empire. His phone rang, displaying a Swiss number he knew by heart. "Montgomery," Dexter answered, his voice deliberately pitched higher than his natural tone, another habit he'd cultivated for his new identity. "The last transfer is complete," Montgomery Pierce said without preamble. Once his father's business partner, the man had taken Dexter under his wing after the fall of Blackwood Technologies, helping him rebuild in the European cybersecurity market, far from the Westbrook's sphere of influence. "All untraceable?" Dexter asked, though he already knew the answer. Montgomery was nothing if not meticulous. "Of course. Your new identity has assets of exactly $43,752, reasonable for a young professional with student loans. Meanwhile, your actual holdings are securely managed through the Zurich arrangement. And my mother? Receiving the best care possible, as always. Dr. Hansen reports small improvements." Dexter closed his eyes briefly. "Thank you. Are you sure about this, Dexter? You've built something impressive these past 5 years. Is revenge worth throwing it all away?" Dexter's gaze fell on the framed photo of his parents, the only item from his previous life he'd kept. His father's proud smile. His mother's eyes, bright and clear, not yet clouded by medication and grief. "They destroyed my family, Montgomery. Not just our company. They killed my father and broke my mother." Scarlett Westbrook was the one who pitched the acquisition to the board. She engineered everything. "And becoming Reed Walsh will fix that." "No," Dexter said, tucking his new Massachusetts bartending license into his wallet. "But it will give me access to her world. I'll gain her trust, discover her secrets, and then I'll use everything I learned to dismantle the Westbrook empire piece by piece, just like they did to us." "And if you're discovered?" "I won't be." Dexter Blackwood disappeared 5 years ago. "Even my own mother wouldn't recognize me now." Montgomery sighed. "Just remember what we built. If you need an exit strategy." "I won't," Dexter said firmly. "Within a year, Scarlett Westbrook will lose everything she values. I promise you that." After ending the call, Dexter, now Reed, picked up his new employee badge for the Beacon Hill Club, the exclusive establishment where Boston's elite gathered to network and unwind. According to his research, Scarlett Westbrook had a standing reservation every Thursday. In 48 hours, Reed Walsh would serve her his carefully crafted smile along with her favorite drink and begin the systematic destruction of everything she held dear. The Beacon Hill Club embodied old Boston money, all mahogany panels, leather chairs, and discreet lighting. Reed polished a crystal highball glass behind the curved marble bar, watching the entrance from the corner of his eye. Thursday night, 8:47 p.m. She was 3 minutes late. When Scarlett Westbrook finally walked in, the effect was immediate but subtle. No one rushed to greet her, yet everyone noticed. She wore a tailored charcoal suit rather than an evening dress, her copper hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, minimal jewelry. Not what he'd expected from the woman he'd researched obsessively for 5 years. "That's Westbrook's daughter," murmured Javier, the head bartender, following Reed's gaze. "She comes every Thursday. Always sits at table 12. Always orders a Macallan 18, neat." Reed nodded. "I've seen her in the business pages. Don't waste your time. She doesn't chat with staff. Barely talks to the other members." As Scarlett settled at her usual table, Reed noticed how she positioned herself. Back to the wall, full view of the room. A defensive posture. Interesting. Within minutes, Reed was approaching her table with her scotch. He'd rehearsed this moment countless times, yet now he felt a flicker of unease. He'd imagined her as a caricature, the spoiled, ruthless heiress. In person, something seemed off about that characterization. "Macallan 18 neat," Reed said, placing the glass on a coaster. Scarlett looked up, her green eyes assessing him briefly. "You're new." "Reed Walsh. Started last week." She nodded once, already turning her attention to the financial documents spread before her. Reed returned to the bar, tamping down frustration. This was always going to take time. Over the next few weeks, their interactions remained minimal. Reed learned her patterns. She arrived alone, worked for exactly 2 hours, nursed one drink, and left without socializing. He positioned himself to serve her each time, gradually establishing himself as her regular bartender. On the 5th Thursday, a disruption to the pattern. A large group of tech executives entered, celebrating a merger. Their volume increased with each round, and by 10 p.m., they were the loudest group in the normally subdued club. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with an expensive watch and louder voice than the rest, noticed Scarlett. "Isn't that Theodore Westbrook's daughter?" he asked his companions, then called out, "Hey there, join us for a drink. We're celebrating taking Microvault public." Scarlett declined with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. 20 minutes and several drinks later, the executive approached her table. "Come on, don't be antisocial. A pretty thing like you shouldn't drink alone." Reed watched Scarlett's posture stiffen. "I'm working. Thank you for the invitation, but I'm fine here," she said. The man leaned over her table. "What's the point of being a Westbrook if you can't have some fun? Your daddy owns half of Boston." Reed moved before the situation escalated, appearing at the table with a fresh drink. "Sir, your colleagues are asking for you. Something about a toast." He positioned himself casually between them. The man frowned. "We were talking, and I believe Ms. Westbrook has declined your invitation," Reed said, maintaining his pleasant bartender smile. "The club has a strict policy respecting members' privacy. Perhaps another time." After a tense moment, the executive retreated, muttering something about stuck-up bitches. Reed placed the fresh scotch on Scarlett's table. "Compliments of the house. Sorry about the interruption. I could have handled it," she said, but her tone had softened. "No doubt, but it's my job to ensure members enjoy the ambience they pay for." Reed noticed the spreadsheets she'd been reviewing. Quarterly projections? Surprise flickered across her face. "You know financial statements? Business administration degree. Bartending pays the bills while I figure out my next move." She studied him with new interest. "What's your assessment?" Reed glanced at the documents again. "Their growth projections are overly optimistic. They're not accounting for the security compliance costs that new legislation will require next quarter." Her eyebrows raised. Most people wouldn't catch that. Most people haven't read the full text of the Digital Securities Reform Act. A hint of a genuine smile appeared. "Why bartending with that knowledge?" Reed shrugged. "Freedom. No corporate politics. I work, I leave, I sleep well." For the first time, Scarlett seemed to actually see him. "Thank you for the intervention, Reed." The way she said his assumed name sent an unexpected shiver through him. This was not the cold-blooded corporate raider he'd envisioned destroying. This woman seemed isolated, guarded. "Just doing my job, Ms. Westbrook." "Scarlett," she corrected, surprising them both. Back at the bar, Javier nudged him. "What did you say to the Ice Queen?" "That's the first time I've seen her have an actual conversation with staff." Reed kept his expression neutral. "Just talk business." Later that night, in his apartment, he stared at the wall covered with research about Scarlett Westbrook, newspaper clippings, printouts of articles, financial records. His carefully constructed narrative about her was already showing cracks, and he'd barely begun. "Doesn't matter who she really is," he told himself. "Remember what they did." But as he lay awake, he couldn't reconcile the woman at table 12 with the villain he'd created in his mind, and that made her infinitely more dangerous to his plans. The Cambridge Innovation Council is pleased to welcome Scarlett Westbrook of Westbrook Corporation. Polite applause filled the hotel ballroom as Scarlett took the stage. Reed, working the event bar, observed her command of the room, confident without appearing arrogant, articulate without being verbose. Nothing like the ruthless character his research had suggested. 3 months had passed since their first real conversation at the Beacon Hill Club. Their interactions had evolved into a strange rhythm, professional but increasingly personal. Each Thursday, she would arrive, he would serve her drink, and they would exchange brief observations about business news or market trends. Reed had positioned himself perfectly. His careful planning was working, yet something felt off. He wasn't supposed to enjoy their conversations. After her speech, Scarlett approached the bar. "You're everywhere these days," she remarked, accepting the scotch he'd prepared. "I pick up events for the extra cash," Reed explained. "Saving for my own venture someday." "What kind of venture?" "Consulting. Helping small tech firms navigate regulations and market positioning." Scarlett studied him. "You've continued surprising me, Reed Walsh. Most people who understand finance and technology chase corporate jobs. The stability, the benefits. I had a front row seat to corporate politics growing up. My father was consumed by it. This wasn't entirely a lie. The best covers stayed close to truth. Hence the bartending. Hence the freedom," he corrected. "Though admittedly, the freedom to barely make rent sometimes." Scarlett swirled her drink, seemingly reaching a decision. "I have a proposition. I need an external perspective on a project, someone with business acumen who isn't entrenched in corporate thinking." Reed kept his expression neutral despite his heart rate accelerating. "What kind of project?" "A confidential review of past acquisitions. Too sensitive for internal teams." She handed him a business card. "If you're interested, call my assistant Vivian to set up a meeting." As she walked away, Reed felt the card between his fingers, heavy stock, embossed lettering. He was in. The Westbrook Corporation headquarters dominated the Boston skyline, 70 floors of steel and glass overlooking the harbor. Reed arrived 20 minutes early, passing through security with the temporary badge Vivian had arranged. His palms were sweaty despite his practiced calm. He was walking into the Lion's Den, the company that had destroyed his family. The executive floor was hushed, the decor minimalist. Vivian, an efficient woman in her 40s, led him to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. "Ms. Westbrook will be with you shortly. Coffee. Black, please." Left alone, Reed resisted the urge to search for anything useful. Security cameras would be everywhere. 10 minutes later, Scarlett entered, followed by Vivian with a leather portfolio. "Reed, thank you for coming." Scarlett's handshake was firm. "What I'm about to share requires absolute confidentiality." "Of course." Scarlett nodded to Vivian, who distributed documents before departing. "Westbrook Corporation has acquired 37 companies in the past decade," Scarlett began. "My father's aggressive expansion strategy has been effective, but I've been reviewing some past acquisitions and found concerning patterns." Reed leafed through the materials, acquisition summaries, financial projections, post-integration results. "What kind of concerns?" "Ethical ones." Scarlett's tone was measured. "I believe some acquisitions may have involved questionable tactics." Reed nearly dropped his coffee. Was she admitting to corporate wrongdoing? "My father believes in winning at any cost," she continued. "I don't share that philosophy. I'm conducting this review outside official channels because I need unbiased analysis before presenting findings to the board." "Why me?" Reed asked. "I'm a bartender with a business degree. You have access to top consulting firms, who would immediately report to my father." Scarlett leaned forward. "You see patterns others miss. You have no corporate agenda." And you don't seem intimidated by the Westbrook name. If only she knew. Reed flipped through more documents, stopping cold when he spotted a familiar name, Blackwood Technologies. This company, he said carefully, tapping the page. What happened here? Scarlett's expression darkened. That's what I'm particularly concerned about. The acquisition was completed 5 years ago. The founder died shortly after. His son disappeared, reportedly moved abroad. And this troubles you because the financials don't add up. We massively undervalued their patents, then recorded an internal valuation 3 times higher immediately after acquisition. There's evidence suggesting we may have manipulated their credit lines before the takeover. Reed struggled to maintain his composure. She was investigating her own company's takedown of his family. I won't lie. It's a complex situation, he said, voice even. What exactly would my role be? External consultant. Review these cases, identify patterns, help me build a case for ethical reform without torpedoing the company. You'd maintain your regular job for appearances, but I'd compensate you well for your time. Reed pretended to consider the offer that was literally everything he had planned for. I'd need access to complete records. You'd have limited but sufficient access. Vivian will arrange a secure workspace here. 3 afternoons weekly should work with your schedule. By the end of the meeting, Reed had become the very thing he'd schemed to become, an insider with access to Westbrook's secrets. Yet his victory felt hollow. Scarlett wasn't the villain he'd constructed. She was actively investigating her father's misdeeds. That evening, Reed stared again at his research wall. If Scarlett was innocent, his revenge target should shift to Theodore Westbrook. But could he trust her apparent ethical stance? Or was this an elaborate misdirection? His phone buzzed. Montgomery Pierce calling from Switzerland. You've been quiet, Montgomery said when Reed answered. I'm in. Consulting position with access to acquisition records. Including Blackwood? Yes. And Pierce. She's investigating the ethics of her father's acquisitions. Including ours. A long silence. Be careful, Dexter. If she's genuine, you might be targeting the wrong Westbrook. Or it's the perfect cover, Reed countered. I need to get closer, learn more. After hanging up, Reed removed one particular photo from his wall, Scarlett at a charity gala, looking bored and entitled. The woman he'd met was nothing like this image. She was complex, intelligent, isolated. And if she was truly innocent of his family's destruction, his carefully crafted revenge plan had just become infinitely more complicated. The secure conference room on the 68th floor had become Reed's second home over the past month. Surrounded by acquisition files, market analyses, and internal memos, he methodically built a case that would either vindicate or condemn the Westbrooks. Today, he finally had access to the complete Blackwood Technologies file. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder containing his family's destruction. Inside were documents he'd never seen. Internal valuations, communication records, board presentations. One memo stopped his heart momentarily. To Theodore Westbrook. From Scarlett Westbrook. Blackwood Technologies acquisition. Father, I've completed the review you requested. While Blackwood has valuable IP in the encryption space, I strongly advise against the current acquisition strategy. Their financial situation is not as dire as our sources indicated, and the aggressive approach we're taking could be viewed as predatory. Instead, I recommend a legitimate partnership focused on their quantum encryption protocol, with fair valuation and shared development rights. This would benefit both companies while maintaining ethical standards. Scarlett. Beneath it was Theodore's handwritten response. Proceed as planned. Remove her from the acquisition team. S doesn't need to know the details. Reed stared at the document, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling. Scarlett had tried to prevent the hostile takeover. Theodore had deliberately kept her in the dark. The door opened, startling him. Scarlett entered, looking tired. Making progress? She asked. Reed composed himself. Yes, the pattern is clear. Targeted pressure on smaller companies, credit manipulation, supplier interference, artificial market obstacles. All technically legal, Scarlett said, sitting across from him. Legal doesn't mean ethical. Reed hesitated, then pushed the Blackwood memo toward her. Did you know about this? Scarlett studied it, her expression hardening. I wrote this memo, but I never saw his response. He told me he was taking my advice and pursuing a partnership. She looked up. He removed me from the acquisition team the next day. By the time I learned what really happened, it was too late. Blackwood was gutted. The founder died, Reed said carefully. Heart attack, 2 days after the takeover. I only found out weeks later. Her voice grew quiet. That's when I started questioning everything. Reed felt sick. For 5 years, he'd directed his hatred at the wrong person. Why are you doing this review now, he asked. Because my father is planning another acquisition wave. 12 targets, including Archer Systems and Meridian Software. Reed recognized the names. Innovative companies led by founders like his father had been. I can't stop him directly, Scarlett continued. He controls the board. But with enough evidence of pattern and practice, I might force ethical oversight. Their eyes met, and Reed saw something he hadn't expected, vulnerability behind her carefully maintained composure. Reed, I know this is just a consulting job for you, but it matters. These aren't just companies. They're people's lives. The irony nearly choked him. If she knew who he really was. I understand that better than you might think, he said. The Martha's Vineyard Charity Gala was a gathering of Boston's business elite, with the Westbrook Foundation as the primary sponsor. Reed had been surprised when Scarlett asked him to attend as her guest rather than working the event. You've become familiar with our practices, she'd explained. I need someone who can identify potential acquisition targets my father might approach. Now, wearing a rented tuxedo, Reed navigated the wealthy crowd, maintaining his bartender-turned-consultant cover while gathering intelligence. Theodore Westbrook held court near the bar, surrounded by fawning executives. That's my father's target audience, Scarlett said, appearing beside Reed with 2 champagne flutes. CEOs with ego problems and liquidity issues. Reed accepted the drink. You don't sound like an adoring daughter. I admire his business intelligence. His methods are another matter. She nodded toward a silver-haired man across the room. Senator Phillips. Father spent years cultivating that relationship to block regulatory reform. Throughout the evening, Scarlett provided similar insights into the power dynamics at play. Reed found himself genuinely impressed by her strategic mind and ethical clarity. Dangerous feelings for someone planning to destroy her family's company. As the evening wound down, they stepped onto the terrace overlooking the moonlit ocean. The night air was cool for early summer. Thank you for coming tonight, Scarlett said. Most men I meet either want something from the Westbrook name or are intimidated by it. I'm just a bartender with a temporary consulting gig, Reed said with a self-deprecating smile. No, you're not. Scarlett turned to face him. You understand business at a level that doesn't come from textbooks. You see patterns even my analysts miss. And you're not afraid to challenge my thinking. Her directness caught him off guard. Maybe I just don't know better. Or maybe you're exactly what I needed. She stepped closer. Someone who sees me, not just the Westbrook air. The moonlight softened her features, highlighting a vulnerability Reed had never associated with the Westbrook name. For a dangerous moment, he forgot who they both were. Forgot his mission, his hatred, his carefully constructed identity. When she leaned in, he should have pulled away. Instead, he met her halfway, their lips connecting in a kiss that threatened everything he'd planned. The taste of champagne, the scent of her perfume, the softness of her touch. None of it aligned with the villain he'd constructed in his mind. As they broke apart, reality crashed back. He was Dexter Blackwood, plotting the downfall of her family. She was Scarlett Westbrook, daughter of the man who destroyed his. I should go, he said abruptly. Confusion flashed across her face. Did I misread the situation? No, it's not that. How could he explain? This is complicated. You're a client. Is that all? Her perceptiveness was unnerving. It's enough for now. Reed stepped back. I should catch the last ferry. Back in his apartment later that night, Reed paced restlessly. The wall of research seemed to mock him now. His revenge plan had fatal flaws. He was targeting the wrong Westbrook, and worse, he was developing feelings for Scarlett. His phone lit up with a text from her. Thank you for your help tonight. We'll continue our work Monday. Professional. Composed. As if the kiss hadn't happened. Reed touched his lips, still feeling the echo of her kiss, and faced an uncomfortable truth. Destroying Scarlett Westbrook no longer felt like justice. It felt like another crime. The secure room in Westbrook Tower had yielded its most damning evidence yet. Reed stared at the document before him. A 5-year-old email from Theodore Westbrook to his head of acquisitions regarding Blackwood Technologies. Apply additional pressure. Their line of credit with First National expires next month. Arthur Chen owes me a favor. Make sure it isn't renewed. Once Blackwood misses payroll, we'll offer 30 cents on the dollar as their only lifeline. It was the smoking gun, proof that Theodore had deliberately engineered his family's financial collapse through banking connections. Reed photographed the document with his secure tablet, adding it to the growing evidence file. The door opened, and Vivian entered. Ms. Westbrook asked me to inform you that the Newport trip is confirmed for tomorrow. The company helicopter will depart at 9 a.m. Reed nodded. Scarlett had mentioned the trip, a review of a potential research facility site, combined with meetings away from her father's watchful eye. Since the gala 3 weeks ago, their professional relationship had continued, the kiss unmentioned but hovering between them like an unresolved chord. Also, Vivian added, lowering her voice, Mr. Westbrook has been asking questions about your background checks. A chill ran through Reed. Is there a problem? Not yet, but he rarely takes interest in consultants. Vivian's loyalty to Scarlett was evident. Be careful. After she left, Reed sent a secure message to Montgomery. Accelerate contingency plans. TW showing interest in my background. The response came quickly. Identity will hold. But consider extraction timeline. Reed glanced at the Blackwood acquisition files. He had what he needed to expose Theodore's methods. Yet the mission had evolved. Revealing the truth now meant protecting Scarlett while bringing Theodore to justice. A complexity he hadn't planned for when revenge was his only goal. The Rhode Island coastline unfolded beneath the helicopter as they approached Newport. Reed watched Scarlett reviewing documents, her profile silhouetted against the window. She'd been quieter than usual this morning. Everything okay? He asked over the headset. She looked up. My father has scheduled an unplanned board meeting for next Tuesday. He's accelerating the acquisition timeline for all 12 targets. Initially just Archer Systems and Meridian. The others will follow. She handed him a folder. These are the preliminary terms. It's the same playbook he used with Blackwood. The familiar approach was there: credit pressure, supplier manipulation, artificial devaluation. History repeating itself. We need to act soon, Reed said. These terms would devastate both companies. The helicopter touched down on a cliffside helipad where a black SUV waited. Within minutes, they were touring the sprawling property, a former naval research facility Westbrook was considering for a new development center. Their guide, a real estate agent, droned on about square footage and renovation potential, but Reed noticed Scarlett was distracted. Her response is automatic. After the tour, they had lunch scheduled at a historic oceanfront restaurant. Once seated at a secluded table overlooking the Atlantic, Scarlett finally relaxed. Sorry for being preoccupied, she said. This isn't just about the acquisitions. Reed waited for her to continue. My father has been difficult lately, questioning my commitment to the company, my judgment. She traced the rim of her water glass. He's arranging meetings with potential suitors again. Suitors? Reed's brow furrowed. Eligible bachelors with the right business connections. He believes a strategic marriage would benefit Westbrook Corporation. Her bitter smile conveyed volumes. Old-school thinking from a modern tyrant. That's medieval, Reed said, genuinely appalled. It's how he views the world. Assets and liabilities. She straightened, visibly pushing away vulnerability. The property looks suitable for development. What did you think? Reed recognized her deflection, but played along. Good location, but the environmental remediation costs they're glossing over could run into millions. They discussed business through lunch, the professional veneer firmly back in place. It was only when they walked along the cliffside path afterward that Scarlett's guard lowered again. I never thank you properly, she said. For what? Taking this assignment seriously. Most consultants tell me what they think I want to hear. She stopped, facing the ocean. My father's created a culture where truth is a liability. Reed studied her profile, strength and isolation in equal measure. Can I ask you something personal? He ventured. She nodded. Why stay? You clearly don't agree with your father's methods. You could start your own company, set your own standards. It's not that simple. Scarlett turned to him. Westbrook Corporation employs over 40,000 people. If I leave, my father's approach continues unchecked. Those acquisition targets suffer, their employees suffer. She paused. And there's my mother's legacy to consider. Your mother? She died when I was 15. Cancer. Scarlett's voice softened. She built the Westbrook Foundation, established our medical research initiatives. The good parts of our company are her vision. If I abandon it, that vision dies too. Reed hadn't known about her mother. Nothing in his research had suggested this motivation. I'm sorry about your mother, he said genuinely. Catherine Westbrook was everything my father isn't. Compassionate, ethical, focused on impact over profit. Scarlett looked at him directly. She made me promise to protect her legacy. Some days that's the only thing keeping me there. The helicopter ride back to Boston was quiet, both lost in thought. When they landed at Westbrook Tower, Scarlett turned to him. Would you have dinner with me tonight? Not as consultant and client. Just us. Every strategic calculation told Reed to maintain professional distance. Getting closer to Scarlett complicated everything. Yet he found himself nodding. I'd like that. The Vermont Care Facility was a 3-hour drive from Boston, but Reed made the journey that afternoon, arriving just before visiting hours ended. He needed to see his mother before confronting whatever was developing with Scarlett. Eleanor Blackwood sat in a sunroom overlooking manicured gardens, a book open but unread in her lap. At 58, she looked older, her once vibrant presence diminished by medication and grief. Mom, Reed said softly, taking the chair beside her. She turned, a spark of recognition warming her eyes. You came. Though aware of his changed appearance, Eleanor was one of the few people who could still see Dexter and Reed. Their monthly visits were carefully arranged through Montgomery to avoid any connection to his new identity. How are you feeling? He asked, taking her fragile hand. Better on the new medication. The fog isn't as thick. She studied his face. You look troubled, my boy. Reed had never been able to hide his feelings from her. I'm close to the truth, Mom. About what really happened to Dad, to our company. And will the truth bring him back? Eleanor asked gently. Will it heal what's broken? It might prevent it from happening to others. She nodded slowly. Just be careful that vengeance doesn't consume what's left of you. Her gaze sharpened momentarily. There's something else. Someone else. Reed hesitated, then nodded. It's complicated. The heart usually is. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Your father would want you to find happiness, Dexter, not spend your life avenging him. As Reed drove back toward Boston that evening, his mother's words echoed. The truth he'd uncovered about Theodore Westbrook demanded justice. But his growing feelings for Scarlett demanded honesty, an honesty that could destroy whatever was developing between them. His phone chimed with a message from Scarlett confirming their dinner plans. Below it was another message from Montgomery, private investigator making inquiries about Reed Walsh in Chicago. Background may be compromised. Proceed with caution. Time was running out for Reed Walsh. Soon, Dexter Blackwood would need to resurface with all the uncomfortable truths that entailed. Theodore Westbrook's private office occupied the top floor of Westbrook Tower, a space designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a god's-eye view of Boston. The furniture was austere, and the walls displayed only symbols of conquest, mounted deal tombstones from major acquisitions. Waiting alone in this sanctum, Reed felt exposed. Theodore's unexpected summons had come an hour before his dinner with Scarlett. Whatever this meeting was about, the timing felt deliberate. The door opened. Theodore Westbrook entered, tall, silver-haired, with cold blue eyes that assessed everything as an asset or liability. Behind him followed a shorter man with the watchful gaze of a career investigator. Mr. Walsh, Theodore said, not offering his hand. Thank you for making time. This is Nathaniel Reeves, our head of corporate security. Reed stood, maintaining the relaxed posture of his bartender persona. Of course, sir. Though I'm not sure how I can help security. Theodore gestured for him to sit, then remained standing. A power move Reed recognized from countless business negotiations. You've been working closely with my daughter on a special project, Theodore began. She speaks highly of your insights. The acquisition review is nearly complete, Reed said carefully. Ms. Westbrook has been thorough in her approach. Yes, my daughter is nothing if not thorough. Theodore's smile didn't reach his eyes. Which makes her choice of an external consultant with your limited qualifications rather curious. Reed maintained a neutral expression. I believe she values an outside perspective. Perhaps. Theodore nodded to Reeves, who opened a folder. Reed Walsh, Reeves began. Graduated from University of Chicago with a business degree. Worked for several financial firms before switching to bartending 3 years ago. Correct? Yes. Corporate life wasn't for me. Interesting. Reeves placed a photograph on the desk. This is you at a UChicago alumni event last year, according to their website. The photo showed a man who resembled Reed, but with subtle differences, a Reed Walsh who had never existed. Except, Reeves continued, when we contacted the photographer, he had no record of this image. It appears to have been digitally inserted into the album. Reed's pulse quickened. There must be some mistake. We thought so too. Reeves produced another document. So we contacted your former employer, Landmark Financial in Chicago. They have no record of a Reed Walsh. Theodore stepped forward. Who are you really? I don't understand what. Stop wasting my time, Theodore snapped. Your background is fabricated. Your references redirect to shell companies. The only real thing about you is your Massachusetts bartending license, issued just 6 months ago. Reed calculated his options rapidly. The Reed Walsh identity was compromised, but they hadn't yet connected him to Dexter Blackwood. My personal history is complicated, he said carefully. But my work for Ms. Westbrook is legitimate. Is it? Theodore's voice was dangerously soft. Or are you here for another purpose? Industrial espionage, perhaps? A plant from a competitor? Before Reed could respond, Reeves placed another photograph on the desk. This one froze his blood. It showed Eleanor Blackwood in her Vermont care facility. Interesting choice of medical facility, Theodore said. Very exclusive. Very expensive. Especially for the mother of a man who supposedly disappeared to Europe 5 years ago. The game was up. They knew. What do you want? Reed asked, his voice dropping to its natural register. Theodore smiled coldly. Now we get somewhere. Hello, Dexter Blackwood. You've made your point. Now what? Now. Theodore circled the desk. Now I explain your situation. You've infiltrated my company under false pretenses. You've misled my daughter. You've accessed confidential corporate information. That's multiple felonies. While I've uncovered evidence of your systematic corporate sabotage, Reed countered, including against my family's company. Allegations from a man committing corporate espionage. How credible? Theodore's smile widened. But more immediately concerning is your mother's situation. The Vermont facility costs, what, $30,000 monthly? What happens to Eleanor when that payment stops? The threat was clear. Reed's hands tightened on the armrests. Then there's Dr. Hansen's experimental treatment protocol, the one showing such promise for her depression. Wouldn't it be unfortunate if her insurance suddenly deemed it experimental and withdrew coverage? You would threaten a sick woman? Reed's voice was deadly quiet. I'm simply outlining consequences. Theodore leaned against his desk. Your mother's care continues uninterrupted if you disappear again, permanently this time. No evidence against me surfaces. My daughter never learns about your deception. The office door suddenly opened. Scarlett stood in the doorway, elegant in a black dress for their planned dinner, expression shifting from confusion to wariness as she registered the tension. Father? Reed? What's going on? Theodore recovered first. Scarlett, perfect timing. Mr. Walsh and I were just discussing his background. His background? She stepped into the room. What about it? Perhaps he should explain. Theodore's trap was perfect, forced Dexter to reveal his deception himself. Scarlett looked at Reed, confusion evident. Reed? The moment stretched between them. 5 years of planning, months of deception, weeks of growing feelings, all colliding in this inevitable moment of truth. My name isn't Reed Walsh, he said finally. What? Scarlett stepped closer. He's been lying to you. To all of us, Theodore interjected. Show her, Reeves. The security chief produced a final photograph, Dexter Blackwood 5 years ago, at his father's funeral. Beside it, a computer analysis showing the facial structure matches beneath Reed's altered appearance. This is Dexter Blackwood, Theodore announced. Son of James Blackwood, whose company we acquired 5 years ago. Recognition dawned in Scarlett's eyes. Blackwood Technologies, the acquisition I was investigating. He infiltrated Westbrook under false pretenses, Theodore continued. Gained your trust, accessed confidential information. All for revenge. Is this true? Scarlett asked, her voice barely audible. Reed, now irrevocably Dexter again, nodded slowly. Yes. The pain that flashed across her face was worse than anything Theodore could have inflicted. You used me, she whispered. All of it was a lie. Not all of it, Dexter said desperately. The evidence we uncovered is real. Your father deliberately destroyed my family's company. Enough, Theodore interrupted. Security will escort Mr. Blackwood from the building. Scarlett, we'll discuss this privately. No. Scarlett's voice had turned to ice. I want to hear what he has to say. What evidence? It doesn't matter now, Theodore dismissed. His credibility is zero. The evidence stands on its own, Dexter insisted, reaching for his tablet. The banking interference, the supplier pressure. There is no evidence, Theodore said sharply. Just the desperate fabrications of a man seeking revenge for his father's business failures. The documents, Dexter began, unlocking his tablet, only to find it wiped clean. He looked up at Reeves, who smiled thinly. Corporate security protocol. Remote wipe of unauthorized devices on secure floors. Everything was gone. 5 months of meticulous documentation erased. Scarlett studied them both, her analytical mind visibly processing the situation. You knew, she said to her father. You knew who he was before this meeting. Theodore waved dismissively. I protect this company from threats. Including me? Her voice was dangerously calm. Is that why you scheduled this confrontation an hour before our dinner? To maximize the humiliation. I needed you to see the truth. The truth, she repeated. That's suddenly important to you? Scarlett, Dexter tried again. Don't. She cut him off with a look of such betrayal it silenced him instantly. You've done enough. She turned to leave, then paused. Father, we'll discuss the board meeting tomorrow. I need time to process this manipulation. From both of you. After she departed, Theodore's triumph was evident. Security will ensure you leave the premises, Mr. Blackwood. Any attempt to contact my daughter or this company will result in immediate legal action and consequences for your mother's care. Are we clear? Dexter stood, his carefully constructed revenge plan in ruins. This isn't over. It was over 5 years ago, when your father signed those acquisition papers. Theodore gestured to security. Goodbye, Mr. Blackwood. Give my regards to Eleanor, while you still can. 20 minutes later, Dexter stood on the sidewalk outside Westbrook Tower, effectively expelled from the life he'd spent months building. His phone contained a single message from Montgomery. Secure facility breach. Eleanor relocated to secondary location. Await instructions. At least his mother was safe from Theodore's threats. But everything else, the evidence he'd gathered, his position close to Scarlett, his chance to expose Theodore's crimes, was gone. Worst of all was Scarlett's face when the truth emerged. Not just anger or betrayal, but genuine pain. He'd hurt her deeply, becoming no better than the man he sought to destroy. As rain began to fall, Dexter walked away from Westbrook Tower, his false identity stripped away, his revenge unachieved, and his heart unexpectedly broken. 2 weeks had passed since Dexter's expulsion from Westbrook Tower. From his small Cambridge apartment, he watched as Theodore's plan accelerated. Business News reported Westbrook Corporation's strategic acquisition initiative targeting 12 companies, beginning with Archer Systems, the same predatory pattern that had destroyed Blackwood Technologies. Dexter had spent days rebuilding his evidence file from backups Montgomery had secured. The documentation was substantial, but useless without a platform to expose it. Any attempt to approach financial regulators would trigger Theodore's retaliation against Eleanor. His phone rang, Montgomery again. The 4th call today. You can't ignore me forever, Montgomery said when Dexter finally answered. I'm working. On what? The revenge plan is compromised. It's time to activate our exit strategy. I'm not leaving, Dexter said firmly. Not with Theodore about to destroy 12 more companies. This isn't just about revenge anymore, is it? Montgomery's voice softened. It's about her. Dexter didn't respond. Dexter, listen to me, Montgomery continued. Theodore Westbrook is dangerous. He's frozen your remaining accounts. He's applied pressure to our European partners. Whatever you're planning, you're running out of resources and time. I'll figure it out. After ending the call, Dexter returned to monitoring Business News. The Archer Systems acquisition was moving rapidly. Their stock had plummeted after a surprise audit raised questions about their financial stability. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Few people knew this address. Cautiously approaching, hand near the panic button Montgomery had installed, Dexter checked the peephole and froze. Vivian, Scarlett's assistant, stood in the hallway. He opened the door. How did you find me? I'm resourceful, she said simply. May I come in? Inside, Vivian surveyed his apartment. The sparse furnishings, the wall covered with notes and documents about Westbrook Corporation. Ms. Westbrook doesn't know I'm here, she said. And I prefer it stay that way for now. Why are you here? Because things at Westbrook have deteriorated rapidly since your departure. Vivian's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Westbrook has effectively placed Ms. Westbrook under house arrest. Her access to company systems is restricted. Her communication is monitored. He's using the Reed Walsh incident to claim she's emotionally compromised. Dexter absorbed this. Is she all right? Physically, yes. Emotionally, Vivian hesitated. She's been betrayed by the two men she trusted most. Her father's using your deception to consolidate his control and accelerate the acquisitions she was fighting against. Why tell me this? Because despite everything, I believe you actually care about her. Vivian's assessment was uncomfortably accurate. And because you're the only person with evidence of Theodore's methods who isn't under his control. My evidence was wiped, Dexter said. Not all of it. Vivian produced a flash drive. I made copies of key documents before the confrontation. Ms. Westbrook had concerns about her father's increasing scrutiny. Dexter took the drive, hope flickering. This helps, but it's not enough to stop him. There's more. Vivian lowered her voice. Theodore is planning something called Project Phoenix. It's beyond the 12 acquisitions you knew about, some kind of major consolidation or merger. Whatever it is, he's keeping it from the board. How do you know this? I've been his executive assistant for 20 years, long before Scarlett joined the company. I've seen what his ambition does to people. Genuine concern showed through her professional veneer. Ms. Westbrook is in danger of becoming another casualty. What exactly are you proposing? An alliance. I can provide internal information and limited access to Ms. Westbrook. You provide the evidence and expertise to expose Theodore's methods. Dexter considered the risks. Theodore threatened my mother's care if I interfered. Your mother was moved to the Mayo Clinic under a different name 3 days ago, Vivian said. Theodore doesn't know yet. Dexter stared at her. How do you know about my mother? Vivian smiled slightly. When you work for Theodore Westbrook, you learn to keep your own intelligence network. I've been protecting Scarlett from her father's worst impulses for years. As Vivian prepared to leave, she handed him a burner phone. I'll contact you on this. If Ms. Westbrook agrees to meet you, and that's a significant if, I'll arrange it. Why would she ever agree to that? Because despite her anger, she knows her father is the greater threat. Vivian paused at the door. And because whatever was developing between you wasn't entirely based on lies, was it? After she left, Dexter connected the flash drive to his computer. The documents confirmed what he already knew about Theodore's methods, but also contained something new. Preliminary information about Project Phoenix, a planned merger with Callister Industries that would create an effective monopoly in 3 technology sectors. If completed, it would devastate not just the 12 targets they knew about, but dozens of smaller companies caught in the consolidated supply chain. 3 days passed with no contact from Vivian. Dexter continued rebuilding his evidence file, adding the Phoenix material. On the 4th day, the burner phone finally buzzed with a text message. Back entrance of Public Garden. Noon tomorrow. Come alone. One chance. The Boston Public Garden was busy with lunchtime visitors enjoying the early fall weather. Dexter arrived early, positioning himself near the specified entrance, hyper-aware of potential surveillance. At precisely noon, a Blacktown car with tinted windows pulled up. The rear door opened. Taking a deep breath, Dexter got in. Scarlett sat inside, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke as the car pulled away from the curb. Vivian arranged this against my better judgment, she finally said, her voice cool and controlled. You have 10 minutes before I return to the office. Thank you for meeting me, Dexter began. Save the pleasantries. What was so important? Project Phoenix. He watched her expression carefully. Your father's planning to merge Westbrook with Callister Industries after the current acquisition wave. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she masked it. And it would create a technological monopoly affecting 3 major sectors. The 12 companies you know about are just the beginning. The merger would make dozens more redundant. I'm aware of the Callister discussions, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. They're preliminary. They're not. Dexter handed her a folder containing printouts from Vivian's flash drive. The deal is structured. Regulatory approvals are being smoothed through Senator Phillips. Your father has already planned which divisions to eliminate post-merger. Scarlett scanned the documents, her composed facade cracking slightly. Where did you get these? Does it matter? They're authentic. She looked up sharply. Everything else you told me was a lie. Why should I believe this? The accusation stung, but Dexter accepted it as justified. Because despite how I presented myself, the evidence we uncovered together was real. Your father destroyed my family's company through deliberate manipulation. Now he's doing it again, on a larger scale. And you care about these companies? Or is this still about revenge? Both, Dexter admitted. But mostly I care about preventing what happened to my family from happening to others. Scarlett studied him for a long moment. You deceived me for months. You made me believe in Reed Walsh, someone who never existed. Reed Walsh was real in the ways that mattered, Dexter said quietly. My background was fabricated, but my work with you was genuine. My feelings were genuine. Convenient, she said bitterly. I came to Westbrook for revenge, Dexter acknowledged. I believed you were complicit in destroying my family's company. The evidence showed otherwise. You tried to prevent what happened to Blackwood Technologies. And that absolved me in your mind. It complicated everything. Dexter met her gaze directly. I continued because I still wanted justice against your father, but also because I believed in what you were trying to do. The car slowed at a traffic light. Scarlett stared out the window, conflict evident in her reflection. How do I know this isn't another manipulation? She asked finally. You don't, Dexter admitted. But ask yourself, what do I gain by warning you about Phoenix? My cover is blown. My revenge plan failed. If all I wanted was to hurt Westbrook, I could take this evidence public. Then why don't you? Because your father still has leverage over my mother's care. Because a public scandal would hurt thousands of innocent employees. And because... He hesitated. Because I believe you're the only person who can reform Westbrook from within. The light changed, and the car continued its circuit of the common. My father has isolated me, Scarlett said after a long silence. My security clearance is restricted. My project team has been reassigned. He's even replaced my regular driver with his security personnel. Vivian mentioned something similar. Vivian is the only staff member he hasn't replaced. A hint of her strategic mind showed through. He doesn't suspect her loyalty. Will you help stop Phoenix? Dexter asked. Scarlett's expression hardened. My father needs to be stopped. But that doesn't mean I trust you, Dexter Blackwood. The use of his real name was jarring after months as Reed. I don't expect trust, he said. Just a temporary alliance against a common enemy. She considered this. If, and this is a significant if, I agree to work with you, I need complete transparency. No more lies. No hidden agendas. Agreed. And this isn't about revenge. It's about stopping unethical business practices and preventing more families from being destroyed. That's all I want now, Dexter said sincerely. Scarlett nodded once, decision made. Vivian will coordinate. We'll need more evidence, particularly about the regulatory manipulation. I have sources who can help with that. As the car completed its circuit and approached the public garden again, Scarlett fixed him with a penetrating look. One last question. All those conversations we had, the insights, the analyses, the connection we seemed to have, was any of that real? Or was it all calculated to gain my trust? The question cut to the heart of his deception. Dexter could have offered reassurances, but he'd promised transparency. It started as calculation, he admitted. But it became real. I didn't expect to respect you, to enjoy your company, to... He stopped, unable to articulate the feelings that had developed despite his intentions. To what? She pressed. To care about you, he finished simply. That was never part of the plan. The car stopped. Their time was up. This alliance is professional only, Scarlett said firmly. Whatever I thought was developing between us was based on a fictional person. Reed wasn't entirely fictional, Dexter said. He was the person I might have become without the burden of revenge. As he reached for the door handle, Scarlett spoke again. I'm doing this to protect the companies my father is targeting and to preserve my mother's ethical legacy. Nothing more. Dexter nodded. Of course. But as he stepped out of the car, he caught the briefest flicker of something beyond professional determination in her eyes. Something complicated that suggested their personal story wasn't finished, despite the walls of distrust between them. The car pulled away, leaving Dexter with a renewed sense of purpose. Stopping Theodore Westbrook had begun as a mission of revenge. Now it was something more, a chance for redemption, for justice beyond the personal, and perhaps for rebuilding what his deception had destroyed. The Manhattan financial district hummed with anticipation as Blacktown cars deposited Westbrook Corporation board members at the gleaming headquarters of Callister Industries. Today's emergency shareholders meeting would formalize the merger that business media had dubbed the tech deal of the decade. Theodore Westbrook stepped from his car, immaculate in a bespoke suit, confidence radiating from every gesture. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The 12 acquisition targets had been pressured into submission, regulatory hurdles had been quietly navigated through his political connections, and his daughter's interference had been neutralized. Behind him, Scarlett emerged from the same vehicle, subdued but elegant. Their relationship had been frosty since the Reed Walsh incident, but Theodore had kept her close, unwilling to risk her speaking to the press or board members independently. "Remember your role today," he murmured as they entered the building. "Support the merger, nothing more." "Of course, father," she replied with uncharacteristic docility that might have concerned him had he not been so focused on the impending triumph. In the executive elevator, Scarlett checked her watch, a subtle signal to Vivian, who rode with them, tablet in hand. The countdown had begun. The Callister boardroom occupied the entire top floor, with panoramic views of Manhattan serving as backdrop to the assembled power players, board members from both companies, major shareholders, legal teams, and financial advisors. As Theodore moved toward the head of the table, shaking hands and radiating confidence, Scarlett took her assigned seat midway down, positioned to be visible but not influential. Exactly as her father had planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," Theodore began once everyone was seated. "Today marks a historic milestone in American business. The merger of Westbrook Corporation and Callister Industries represents not merely a consolidation of assets, but a strategic vision for technological dominance in the coming decade." As he continued his practiced speech, Scarlett caught Montgomery Pierce's eye across the room. The silver-haired executive, ostensibly present as an interested European investor, gave an almost imperceptible nod. Their pieces were in position. "Before we proceed to the formal vote," Theodore continued, "are there any questions?" This was traditionally a formality. All substantive discussions had occurred in private meetings weeks earlier. Scarlett raised her hand. Theodore's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Scarlett. I'd like to present some relevant information regarding the proposed merger's compliance with regulatory standards." Her voice was calm, professional. "All regulatory matters have been thoroughly addressed by our legal team," Theodore dismissed. "This isn't the appropriate forum for technical details. With respect, Father, this information directly impacts shareholder value and corporate liability." Scarlett stood, a power move she'd learned from him. "As a board member, it's my fiduciary duty to present it." Murmurs rippled through the assembled executives. Theodore's jaw tightened, but with 24 board members watching, he couldn't silence her without raising suspicions. "Be brief," he conceded. Scarlett nodded to Vivian, who distributed sealed folders to each board member. "What you're receiving is evidence of systematic corporate malfeasance in recent Westbrook acquisitions," Scarlett announced, "including banking interference, supplier coercion, and artificial market manipulation to devalue target companies." Theodore's face darkened. "This is absurd. Where did you obtain these alleged documents?" "From your own secured servers, Father." Scarlett pressed a button on her tablet, and the room's display screens activated, showing email threads and internal memos, all bearing Theodore's signature or initials. "This merger," she continued, "is the culmination of a strategy designed to circumvent antitrust regulations through sequential predatory acquisitions. Project Phoenix, as you named it, would effectively create a monopoly in 3 technology sectors." The room erupted in concerned murmurs as board members reviewed the evidence. "This is a fabrication," Theodore snarled, losing his composure. "A desperate attempt by my daughter to undermine my authority after her emotional judgment was compromised by—" The boardroom doors opened, interrupting him. Dexter Blackwood entered, followed by 2 men in dark suits. "By me." Dexter completed Theodore's sentence. Dexter Blackwood, former heir to Blackwood Technologies, one of the companies destroyed by Mr. Westbrook's predatory practices. Theodore lunged for the security button beneath the table, but Vivian had already disabled it. "The gentleman with Mr. Blackwood," Scarlett announced to the room. are Special Agents Carter and Wilson from the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. They have a warrant to seize specific Westbrook and Callister records pertaining to antitrust violations. This is outrageous, Theodore blustered. Security. Your security team has been cooperating with federal agents for the past hour, Agent Carter said. I suggest you do the same, Mr. Westbrook. As chaos erupted in the boardroom, Scarlett stepped close to her father. You taught me to identify leverage and use it decisively, she said quietly. Consider this my final lesson. 3 months later, Dexter stood at the edge of what had once been his family's estate in Cambridge. The property, sold during Blackwood Technologies' collapse, was now surrounded by construction equipment. The winter air was crisp, his breath forming clouds in the December afternoon. The aftermath of the Westbrook-Callister merger collapse had been seismic. Theodore faced multiple federal indictments for securities fraud, antitrust violations, and witness tampering. Westbrook Corporation stock had initially plummeted, then stabilized under new leadership, Scarlett's leadership. Her decision to cooperate fully with investigators, implement aggressive ethical reforms, and establish a compensation fund for companies damaged by her father's practices had been both morally right and strategically brilliant. The business press now hailed her as a corporate reformer. Dexter heard footsteps crunching on frozen gravel behind him. Sentimental journey? Scarlett asked, joining him at the property's edge. Something like that. He smiled slightly. I never expected to see this place again. In the months since their alliance had exposed Theodore's crimes, their relationship had evolved into something neither could precisely define. Not quite friendship, definitely not romance, but a connection forged through shared purpose and painful honesty. The reconstruction is on schedule, Scarlett said, surveying the site. The main house frame will be completed by February. The property's restoration had been her idea, a gesture of restitution that went beyond the financial settlement Westbrook Corporation had made to the Blackwood family. My mother asked me to thank you again, Dexter said. Seeing the plans for the house has given her something to focus on. Dr. Hansen says her progress has accelerated. I'm glad. Scarlett's expression softened. How is she doing at the new facility? Better. The experimental treatment is showing real promise. Dexter turned to face her fully. None of this would have been possible without you, Scarlett. We did it together. She pulled her coat tighter against the winter chill. Your evidence combined with my access was what made the difference. They stood in companionable silence, watching workers secure tarps over fresh construction before departing for the day. I received Montgomery's proposal, Scarlett said eventually. The joint venture between Pierce Security and Westbrook's cybersecurity division makes sense, especially with you leading the integration. You're comfortable with me having a role in Westbrook's operations? After everything, you've more than proven your capabilities, she said pragmatically. And your insight into how companies can be targeted makes you uniquely qualified to help protect them. This was their new dynamic, professional, respectful, focused on rebuilding rather than the deception that had brought them together. As twilight approached, they walked toward their respective cars. Will you be at the Foundation Gala next week? Scarlett asked casually. Montgomery insists it's important for networking, though formal events aren't really my strength. I recall Reed Walsh handling them quite smoothly, she said, a hint of humor in her voice. It was the first time she'd voluntarily mentioned his alter ego without bitterness. Progress. Reed had his moments, Dexter acknowledged. Though I don't miss the bartending. At her car, Scarlett hesitated. The past few months have been intense. Rebuilding the company, the federal investigations, the public scrutiny. You've handled it remarkably. I had good motivations. She looked back toward the construction site. My mother would have approved of making things right. The mention of Catherine Westbrook reminded Dexter of their conversation months ago, before his identity was revealed, when they'd walked along the Newport cliffs and she'd shared her deepest motivation. I meant to ask, he said. The medical research initiative you mentioned, the one your mother started. Is that continuing? Scarlett's expression brightened. Actually, it's expanding. We've redirected funds from the abandoned merger into a new research center focused on treatment-resistant depression and trauma recovery. Like my mother's condition, Dexter realized. Yes, I spoke with Dr. Hansen about experimental approaches. It seemed fitting that something positive should come from this whole situation. This thoughtfulness, this fundamental decency beneath her businesslike exterior. was what had first made Dexter question his revenge plan. It was also what made working with her now both rewarding and complicated. "Scarlett," he began tentatively, "I know we've established a working relationship, and I value that. But I've been wondering if eventually—" She held up a hand, stopping him. "Dexter, I'm not ready for that conversation. Maybe I won't ever be." He nodded, accepting her boundary. "I understand. Do you?" Her gaze was penetrating. "When I met Reed Walsh, I felt a connection I hadn't experienced before. Finding out he was a fiction created to manipulate me was devastating." "Reed wasn't entirely fictional," Dexter said carefully. "He was parts of me without the burden of revenge. The conversations we had, the connection, that was real. Perhaps." Scarlett's expression softened slightly. "But trust once broken isn't easily restored." "I know." She opened her car door, but paused before getting in. "I'm not saying never, Dexter. I'm saying not yet. We both need time. Me to rebuild trust, you to figure out who you are beyond both Reed Walsh and your mission of revenge." It was more hope than he'd expected, more honesty than he probably deserved. "I can work with not yet," he said with a small smile. As she drove away, Dexter remained beside his car, watching the last light fade from the winter sky. The past year had taken him from vengeful deception to unexpected alliance to something approaching redemption. His family's legacy was being restored, his mother's health improving, and the corporate predator who had destroyed their lives was facing justice. And Scarlett Westbrook, the woman he'd planned to destroy, then reluctantly admired, and ultimately come to care for deeply, had left the door open, if only slightly, to a future neither of them could have imagined when their paths first crossed. On the construction site that would become his family home again, lights flickered on, illuminating the framework of what was being rebuilt. As Dexter drove away, he reflected that it was an apt metaphor for everything in his life now. Structures of the past, reimagined for a future still taking shape. Not a perfect ending, but a meaningful beginning. And after all they'd been through, that seemed like enough.